you're on.
Now I'm going on to another project of mine, who is on homonormativity in the Swedish gay press in the late 60s until the middle of the 80s. And when I started doing this project, it was in the 2006. I was just finishing my PhD in bisexuality, and I've been doing this kind of exploration of notions of bisexuality in the Swedish general newspapers. And I was interested in, okay, what about the gay press? I know now a bit about how the Swedish straight press is producing and using images of bisexuality. But what about the gay press? And I was coming from a kind of lesbian gay community, and I was like feeling at home in this kind of community, and I was also part of one of the papers as a part of the editing committee. So I've been producing kind of texts within the gay press as well, and now I wanted to go back to that kind of environment and quickly exploring its use of bisexuality, but from a more historical perspective, because I wanted to look upon it from the beginning, it's called, and in Sweden the first papers were produced in the 50s, but most things is happening as in UK and USA in the late 60s and in the 70s. So the focus in the study, although I've been gathering matches from the 50s, it's mostly about 70s and 80s. So what I'm going to do now is a bit about love, and first about romantic love, and research those discourses about romantic love. Similar to the kind of emotions, as a generally, the kind of biological notions of love or feelings. Romantic love, which is part of the love kind of discourse, a kind of dominating notion of what love is to be like. It's in the kind of more traditional, I don't know, dominating discourse. Romantic love is kind of essentially human, boundless, independent of each of social stratifications. You can have a kind of traumatic and tragic falling in love in the wrong person, and you can't really do something about it because it's just coming to you, and can't really defend yourself against that really human notion or feeling of falling in love. So it's a lot about the kind of you can't go against this big feeling. So you can fall falling in love with the wrong gender, the wrong kind of sexuality, wrong class, wrong race, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. And this is something everybody is supposed to have the possibility of. Everybody is supposed to have the possibility to fall in love and to be objects of love. It doesn't, regardless of where or who you are, you can always be object for somebody's love. So, like, kind of, this is also is in relationship to kind of people choose to marry a person of good standard, but they can't choose who they fall in love with. It's kind of love becomes kind of a revolutionary power in this kind of discourse of romantic love. But at the same time, we have a feminist discourse, or not only feminist, but love, and mostly romantic love, as a kind of risky business for mostly women who are, through this kind of romantic love, being as a kind of in a position as locked into kind of patriarchal discourse or patriarchal structure, where you are being very, very dependent on your male, the object of your desire, the male object of your desire. And through the kind of romantic love, you are also staying, for instance, in a relationship who might be risky for you in some way, different ways. You are in risk of being, I don't know the word right now, but not unfaithfulness, but there's a kind of examples from studies where people with HIV positive people and sex workers may be not using condoms in the love relationship because this is about love, and in a loving relationship you're not supposed to be feeling insecure, or you shouldn't kind of not include your loved one. You should let go of control and not be securing you against the other person through the kind of condom use or something like that. So this kind of vulnerability discourse about romantic love and how it's become kind of a risk for mostly women and people who are more dependent on the person you are in love with. Kind of talk. But then we also have the kind of psychological development discourse or something like that, that you in some way, in order to become adult, you also have to fall in love. It's part of adulthood to be able to fall in love. So there's a lot of studies about young women mostly, how they are performing romantic love as a way to produce themselves as a more adult person in the peer group or whatever they are. They try to produce themselves as a person who are falling in love. And if you're not falling in love, you're not that adult or not that developed as your peers. So it really becomes a kind of power thing to kind of make your position in the group thing to do. But also about, recently I saw kind of articles about similar talks about boys, how they also have the kind of years when they are just fooling around sexually, then they are becoming also objects or subjects of this romantic love discourse, that they suddenly became persons who falls in love and became more serious in their relationship and not just fooling around, but suddenly they are committed through this kind of romantic thing. Another discourse of kind of, I don't know if it's a new discourse, but it's about respectability, and mostly I've thought that I've seen that in discussions about gay marriage, that romantic love becomes a part of a kind of respectability. To become a respectable person is to produce yourself as in a romantic relationship, to where the end of this romantic, or the first part of this is to fall in love in this kind of traditional way, but in the same-sex partner, and then you get married because that's a part of the plot. So romantic discourse in the kind of gay marriage debates is quite useful in that case, and that is also one of the things I hope to, when I've been finishing this paper sometimes in the future, I think this respectability and romantic love is something I have to focus on or work with or work through. That romantic love as a kind of repertoire or a rhetorical device you can use in order to get respectability and political power, and or in this case as a sexual political strategy in order to produce kind of better homosexual or bisexual subjects in relationship to the worst kinds of who's just fooling around or not that committed to whatever they are doing. But then also this kind of talk about the impossibility and the kind of struggles or ambivalence in a kind of broader love discourse between the kind of passionate or romantic love and the commitment or the companionate love, where you're in the long end is not really supposed to stay on that kind of romantic love track, but you're supposed to in some way to move on and become even more mature in your love. So you start with that kind of romantic love, and then you go into the kind of more mature and become maybe kind of more companionate love relationship, which is more stable and more and forever thing. So the passionate love is produced as something much too expressive, too emotional. So you can't stay for long in that kind of being. You're going to be eaten up by your romantic love if you stay in that phase. And then finally, of course, which is all about is as a kind of historizing thing that romantic love is really a product of our time with a specific history and not that very long history. In Sweden, there's a study on how the young bourgeoisie women were starting to produce kind of romantic love in the late 18th century. I don't know if it's similar here, but there's about then it started to become something you was going to do. But I think it's became more and more dominant during the 20th century, but in the late 18th century it started to become or being produced as a better thing, more kind of good thing to do. But then in sexuality studies, so I haven't written down the forenames, but Jackson Cram was kind of exploring in among young heterosexual women's stories or talks, and that was kind of two repertoires, two talks, definitions of sex or sexuality. There's good sex, which is connected to this romantic discourse, within which sex is constructed as making love, that it's special, beautiful, and after which you hold that moment as a kind of emotional kind, or not emotion, but a kind of love emotional definition of what sex is about, or is supposed to be about. And then we have the kind of other kind of sex, which mostly is become a worse kind or a less important kind, maybe, kind of sex. So kind of something you need to do, more causal, more incidental, not long-lasting. It just was something I wanted to do, and then we didn't met again. It was just a causal thing, or it was just for fun or something like that. And I can think about this a kind of within a kind of discourse of sexuality. There's this kind of two kinds, or probably more, but there's in the gay press there's a lot about how to produce a kind of gay sense in relationship to those kinds of sexualities, the one who is connected to romantic love and the one who's not. Because the thing is that in Sweden, the lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transgender rights organization RFSL, who was formed in the 1950s, they have been producing different kinds of brochures during the years, but the very first brochure was published in 1980, and it was actually called Homosexuality is Love. And it was like, why, if that's the first brochure you produce as kind of rights organization, it must be really important to say that. And I wonder why. You can say a lot of things, but why do you have to say homosexuality is love? And so it's not really a focus in the whole study on bisexuality in the gay press, but it's kind of a part of it, which I thought, oh, this love thing is in some way important, because the love thing is something is being used in the gay press to exclude bisexuals. And this presentation is a little bit about how the change of the kind of sexuality discourse in the gay press from more sex-oriented or sex-practice-oriented to more love-oriented, and how love is being used as a kind of sexual political rhetorical device in some way. So it's kind of between the homosexuality as love versus homosexuality as sexual. It kind of could be quick and anonymous, discrete practices. But I first have to introduce a notion of homonormativity. What's about time? Is it? Okay. Because there are two kinds of homonormativity definitions, and I can say, of course, you can talk about heteronormativity and binormativity as well, but now I'm going to focus on homonormativity. So I'm not excluding any possibilities of talk about this through the gaze of heteronormativity or binormativity, but this is a homonormativity track. So first we have a kind of critical definition. Lisa Duggan in the beginning of 2000 who's talking about the new homonormativity in relationship to neoliberal heteronormative politics, where it is like something that does not challenge heterosexist institutions and values, but rather upholds, sustains, and seeks inclusions within them. And she used this term as a way to criticize mainstream, mostly heterosexual media's heteronormative constructions of a particular type of good homosexual, as opposed to the other kind of homosexuals. It's very much in line with Gail Rubin's talk about kind of differences, or constructions of differences within the kind of sexual minorities groups, where the people who is closest to performing the kind of good heterosexual monogamous marriage thing is become bettered than the one who is too long distance from that good idealized couple. So this is mostly about how straight media and partly also the gay press or gay community is trying to produce good homosexuals as close to heteronormative as possible, and the other ones is becoming other and dirty. But then we have also kind of opposing, and not that it's not that different definition, but it's a bit of a kind of opposing definition of homonormativity, which has been conceptualized by Susan Stryker, which is both of trans activists and trans theorists. So she's talking from the position of inside against the kind of norm within the norm. So she talks about homonormativity as a concept in relationship to or within gay, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intergroup dynamics. So it's less about looking upon the heterosexual communities producing of good homosexual objects or subjects, but the gay community's production of what is good to be, what is the good thing to be or to do in the gay community, and how both trans people and bisexual people and different kinds of gay people are being excluded in the gay community, not being really positioned as the good ones who we can represent the community through. So she talks about, defines the term as a privileging of homosexual ways of differing from heterosexual norms and an antipathy, or at least unthinking blindness toward other modes of queer differences, that you like focusing on the monogamous gay couple and not really are interested in or showing the non-monogamous gay couple or whatever it's not what it's not being represented or shown. So this study is, at first it was only about bisexuality in the gay press. I wanted to know what use of notion of bisexuality was being, how it was being used, and what does it make happening. But more and more I got into the kind of homonormativity thinking. So I thought a lot about how bisexuality was produced in relationship to kind of homonormative subjectivity. But focus here is on kind of change. Well, not really. It's not like a linear change from something to that, but it's like a difference of talks where in the beginning of the 70s it was more about and kind of inclusionary talk about sexuality or bisexuality as the revolutionary power or the thing you could use to change the world. And that's kind of also a Googleized, a Google translated transcript from an article in the gay press about this. Like, dictatorial powers in all times have pressed down our sexuality, called dirty, to control our energy and pathways which suited them and made us afraid to seek our own way. But now there are grassroots movements where people release their sexual energy by rejecting prejudice and intimidation, and the movement is most vigorous in Italy at present. Pretty soon you can find that expressing that homosexual and heterosexual are indifferent. It's a lot about sexuality. It's not supposed to be specific homosexuality or heterosexuality, but the let's talk about that part of the construction of homosexuality and heterosexuality. It's part of the kind of what made people limited, that you should release yourself to all kind of possibilities you can have. So in the beginning of the 70s, there was a lot about talk about this possibility of releasing yourself, and you shouldn't shouldn't contain your sexuality. You should just let it float around, and so kind of human sexuality as liberating. But in the same time, there's kind of, oh, well, it's not that easy. So in the same time you're producing this as the really revolutionary force, it's not easy. And this not easy is like, okay, it's not that sexual political productive. It may be an interesting or nice idea, but when it comes to sexual politics, it's not that productive or effective. It becomes, in several articles, positioned as a bit naive, and perhaps in the future, perhaps in the past, but not really efficient in the political power right now. So in some way it started with a kind of sexuality thing, but very, very quickly it became more about love and the kind of the sensual pleasures, or sexuality has to be in some way used in a kind of love thing, like in this, that kind of love is revolutionary power, or it's supposed to be about love, but still it's about a kind of genderless love, but you still are supposed to, that kind of revolutionary potential of love everybody, or not being decided upon one gender. But here's like kind of a but. Okay, sensual pleasures, philosophy, but not as an end in itself. The sensual pleasure gives power to love, to rub off and give results in more comfortable conditions for people, understanding between people, and also a new vision of the human environment and living conditions. So something like, okay, the sensual thing is wonderful, but you have to use it in a kind of loving way. At the time, 5. Then I just go on, because it was all, again, the kind of talk about kind of gliding from the kind of the thing is bisexuality, and then the thing is bisexual love, and then, but it's not that efficient. It's not that revolutionary actually, because the thing who is really revolutionary, that is the open homosexual love. That is what to use in the kind of political movement. And this extract is also a talk about people who are coming from RFSL, this Lesbian Gay Federation organization, and go into the kind of Swedish school to do sexual education. And they talk about here, what do we talk about in sexual education? For one thing is talk about what is homosexuality. So homosexual, what is it? For simplicity, we often use the word homosexual when we inform, also in schools, for instance. Then it's important that we first talk about what we mean by it. We believe that all people can accommodate both homosexual and heterosexual feelings in varying degrees. A homosexual is someone who has more homosexual than heterosexual feelings, so there are no hard distinction between homosexual and heterosexual people. The word homosexual, for often unknowingly, thoughts to people who are more sexual than others, and that completely separates sex from other parts of the personality. It's important to mention that homosexuality for us is linked to love, relationship, friendship, affection, intimacy, pleasure, conflicts between people, good or less good, good or less good condition. Something, translation, etc. Many guys speak of themselves as fags, a word that we want to wash clean by using it. The women say lesbian or lesbians of themselves. Fags and lesbian is probably a better word than homosexual, because they are not so one-sided evoked sorts of sex. So it's just a change from everything is about sex. That is revolutionary. To we don't want to talk really about sex. We want to talk about love. And when we talk about it publicly, which is a kind of sexual political strategy, when we talk about in schools, it's really political to do. We talk about love. And we talk about a kind of the importance of feelings. And somebody, I don't know if she's been written about it, but she talked about the part of your homonormativity in this is also about there's never been a kind of accusation of lesbians not being able to love, but it's mostly gay men who has been the kind of objects of not being loving. So this whole homosexuality in love is both very male-oriented, that is gay men who are the one who want to say homosexuality is love. But in that kind of production of homosexuality is love as the main thing, the main sexual political thing, is also to exclude that for lesbians perhaps it would be more productive or revolutionary to talk about lesbianity as sex. And in the same time you may think about bisexuality as this kind of homosexuality is love as something who's make other kinds of sexual and emotional expressions less important than kind of gay male-oriented homosexuality is love. Yeah, I think I stopped there. It's not really shoot, but I hope it was about understanding.